IP addresses. IP stands for Internet Protocol, and an IP address is a 32-bit dotted decimal address. In other words, it consists of 4 numbers that are separated by periods. It's used to uniquely identify a device on a network that uses the TCP/IP protocol. And IP addresses are divided into 3 classes, which are based on the number of possible IP addresses in each network within each class. But there's an impending shortage of IP addresses, and a new scheme is being developed. Basically, at the beginning of what we now call the Internet, when IP addressing was first being developed, the people that were starting it had no idea how fast it would grow. There were only a certain number of networks that could have a huge number of hosts. In other words, there were only a certain number of networks that could have many computers and servers connected to the network with separate IP addresses all connected to the Internet. Those networks went to the government and to the largest corporations at the time. But there were only, in today's standards, very few networks to go around. Those were called Class A addresses, and they were pretty much taken up by the government and by large corporations. Class B addresses were given to medium-sized corporations because we could have 65,000 hosts on one network in a Class B address. With a Class A address, we could have 16 million. So you can see that's a huge difference. And then finally, Class C addresses were reserved for smaller companies because they could only have 254 hosts on each network. But there were 2 million host networks to go around. So many people never envisioned running out of networks, but that is in fact what has happened. And now we use proxies and network address translators to artificially create more networks, to create private networks within our networks. But there's also a new scheme that's being developed for TCP/IP, which will probably be a 128-bit hexadecimal addressing system. So it's an evolving technology, just like everything else in computers. But the thing to know about TCP/IP for now is that it is a 32-bit address, which is represented in a dotted decimal format. TCP/IP can be set on a device in one of 2 different ways. Either statically, in which case it's manually assigned to a workstation or to a router, or dynamically. We can use a special kind of server called a DHCP server, which stands for Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol. And this server can lease a workstation an IP address for a period of time. But clients and users don't generally use the IP address in a direct way to communicate with another server. What they use is a domain name. A domain name is a unique text-based name that identifies an internet address. And domain names are paired up with the IP address by special servers called domain name servers. Typical endings of domain names are edu, gov, com, org, net, and there are others. And the service, the domain name server service, tracks the relationships between the domain names and the IP addresses. This is the underpinnings of how the Internet works. The process of transferring the packets from one network to another is called routing, and that's an extremely important part of Internet communication. And we'll talk about routing in our next section.